Hello, one and all, to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and this is World Watch. Again, differently, we're doing playoff summaries, reviews. This currently of the iteration of the PCS, the last of this particular iteration of the Southeast Asian, now known as the APAC region, Asia Pacific region, in its form, which is a shame because the PCS had done a nice job of niching itself. Going from like the GPL to the LMS, now the PCS, and now to whatever it's going to be called later. As a final playoff, this one was a lot more competitive than I expected. So it's fun, and it gives me this bittersweet feeling as to why do we keep eliminating these regions. But without further ado, if ever you're wondering what all of these previews, all these reviews and like summaries of each particular best of five, if you follow me on the TikTok, you'll see them as I watch them at that point, linked below. Otherwise, let's take a look at these best of fives. To note, the PCS playoffs were played on patch 14.15, so 14.15. Let's take a look. Some series just leave a sour taste in your mouth. Detonation, FocusMe are the more coordinated team in the series. You couple that with a solid sense of macro play and a neutral approach, and you have a solid team on our hands. But we find them so disengaged and slow. Their lack of proactivity really hurting their efforts, as even when their opponents are giving them easy outs over and over again, they just kind of twiddle their thumbs around instead of pushing down against them with their leads. Now, Deep Cross have the opposite issue. They have some great proactivity, and while controlling the tempo, using early game advantages to really make a great statement and ballooning leads, and pushing them as far as they can. But their coordination is a little all over the place. Well, not just the coordination. We have their macro play, neutral setups, much of the fundamentals of the game is just kind of a mess. And when they are online, they look great, but it's not consistent, and that is the biggest problem. My MVP of this series is 665, whose jungle play really got Deep Cross Gaming enough space to find success. This has been round one of the PCS's bracket stage. Detonation, FocusMe versus Deep Cross Gaming. I have some strong doubts that either of these teams will cinch a slot. Now, the Flying Oysters manage a lot of solid early game neutral play, some adaptability and individual micro plays that are pretty interesting. Frank find some solid coordination in the middle to late game, but only around then, and a lot of tempo control, but only once the lead is established, and a good sense of their win conditions. But both teams lack consistent coordination at all stages, from team fights to anything else. Some baffling macro choices where like no lane control or wave management is done. A lot of rushed plays and skipping of a lot of steps, especially around the neutral objectives in the late game. It feels like I'm constantly watching 10 players individually trying to be the hero at varying ranges of success. If you want to watch a high-level solo queue game, this is a pretty good, approximation to that. But if either team wants to have a shot at Worlds or even international success, a lot of polishing is needed to get going for them. My MVP for this series is Wako, who was the best at playing the hero. This was round one of the stage 2 in the PCS. CTBC Flying Oysters versus Frank Esports. Any other result in this series would have been shocking. Frank continued to lack what is needed to be a Worlds caliber team. They have some moments of early game play that hold some strong neutral approaches and a solid sense of their win conditions, but a lack of ability to balloon leads is still rather rough. Add that with bizarre macro approaches, inconsistent coordination, and just underwhelming play in general. I would say that the Talons is Worlds ready, but that's like the expectation. We know they are Worlds ready. It's just how clean can they get? Things like vision play, macro approach, coordination, everything is right there for the team of this kind of historic caliber in this region. But Game 3 had me questioning some of their strengths with non-laning early game play, and how well can they actually play from behind? Like, what does Game 3 look like if Frank knew how to actually balloon leads? My MVP for this series is Betty, who was so consistent that Frank struggled to even touch him. This was round 2 of the stage 2 of the PCS in the upper bracket. Frank Esports versus Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports. And you got two different kinds of uncoordinated here. Now, Deep Cross Gaming continued to hold some of the strong early game approaches, some solid proactivity and ballooning of leads. This could be a decent team for the PCS, but their coordination and skirmishing continues to be a huge detriment to their play, slowing down any leads they accrue or just straight up making their deficits much, much worse. So while on paper, they would make plays that are supposed to work, it often fumbles in leads, at least if leads are not big enough. Now, the Hawks over here mirror this in a lot of ways. While their coordination and neutral setups are quite excellent most of the time, and their early game and read on win conditions are fairly solid, I have some concerns about their over-aggression. The coordination in and of itself is never a problem, and more that the whole team coordinates into some very baffling plays or wind up with some target selections that are super questionable. Neither of these teams are world's caliber yet. My MVP for the series is Dasher, who really carried when it mattered. This has been stage 2, round 2 in the upper bracket of the PCS. Deep Cross Gaming versus Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming. You really need to pull the trigger much earlier. World's contenders are much faster on the draw. Detonation FocusMe continue their strong coordination with some decent early neutral plays, but only in the face of their opponents playing at the same pace as them. Which is a shame because when behind by an astronomical amount of gold, Detonation showed proactive play and attempts around clawing back, but by that point it was far too late. Frank Esports, for their part, are still playing from very inconsistent ballooning of gold in leads. They just also hold strong coordination and decent macro plays, but it's just from their opponents allowing them all the time in the world to balloon these games without any concerns of a loss of momentum that frankly won't exist with any other opponent. Frank will have to show better in the series to come or fall behind more and more. My MVP for this series is Wacko, who was playing out of his mind during these skirmishes. This is stage 2, round 1, or round 2 of the lower bracket of the PCS. Detonation FocusMe versus Frank Esports. At some point, individual skill will trump mediocre coordination. Deep Cross demonstrate to us some moniker of a well thought out early game, solid neutral setups, a decent amount of coordination, but their approach to macro choices added on with some micro errors and an inability to properly balloon leads, and we were left with a team open to so many vulnerabilities. The Flying Oysters, for their part, still have some questionable coordination and this attitude to play as 5 independent heroes looking for game-winning plays. But in this case, it helped to match Deep Cross's proactivity and really punish their style. I have to wonder, though, for how long will this take them before facing a team with just as much individual skill but more coordination and macro-oriented playstyle. As of now, the Flying Oysters is not quite world's caliber, but they are close to it. I can feel it. My MVP for this series is Shun, as he looked near untouchable in this series. This was round 2 of the lower bracket of the PCS in stage 2, Deep Cross Gaming versus CTBC Flying Oysters. Congrats to Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports on being the 6th team to qualify for Worlds. Now, the Hawks bring us a nice set of skirmishes through the series and decent neutral setups. Otherwise, it was a little bit of a mess. There are many things at play, from bizarre coordinations to micro errors to over-aggression, so on and so forth, but the crux of the issue this series for the Hawks was a lack of proactivity in a way that baffled me. They don't play well from behind and lose every single early game, and this honestly really needs to be corrected before their next series. The Talons for their part, just continue what is expected from them with this qualification, but it was a little messier. They are better coordinated with stronger adaptability between games and approach to their win conditions, but their over-aggression and micro-errors really cost them a lot of momentum each game. In situations where the Hawks could have been more proactive in this series, we would have had a very different result. Now, the Talons need to polish their play if they want to be convincing representatives, at least to everyone. My MVP for this series is Betty for his team fighting positioning being out of this world. This was round 3 of the upper bracket in stage 2 of the PCS. Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming versus Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports. There really isn't much that has changed since the last time both of these teams faced off. The Flying Oysters have strong early game sense with a focus on neutral control and micro outplays, while Frank play the mid to late game better with macro choices that really force their opponent's hand and balloon lead solidly once and if established. What's wrong is that it doesn't seem to show a lot of improvement from either of teams has happened. Neither team really implemented a stronger approach to their styles, and my biggest concern for both of these teams is that their consistency with regard to coordination and micro plays it's still the same problems. And frankly, neither team has dissuaded my concerns between then and now. Frank have the chance to go up against the SoftBank Hawks, but I'm just not convinced that they'll pull off the win to cinch the second slot. And if they do, I'm not convinced the squad is worlds ready at all. There's a lot of improvement needed from this squad. My MVP for this series is Gemini for how much control he established around neutral plays. This was round 3 of the lower bracket in stage 2 of the PCS. CTBC Flying Oysters versus Frank Esports, the rematch. Congrats on Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming on being the 14th team to qualify for Worlds. As expected, Frank Esports was not able to pull it off. Their mid-game approach on top of their skirmishing tools helped a lot in regards to finding some success combined with some solid coordination. And honestly, this could have been a decent team, but their lack of consistency on top of lackluster approach to neutral objectives and serious inability to balloon leads meant that they were going to struggle against the Hawks just point blank. Mostly because the Hawks have such an aggressive style, and for once, they helped actually correct their lack of proactivity that previous series had, making their early game much stronger, allowing them to use their solid neutral approach and coordination to really bring it home this time. Now, I'm not fully convinced that the Hawks have everything corrected on this front. Signs of it are still around and were still present in the series, and on top of their overzealous aggression, micro errors, this is still a very easy team to punish, and most teams will. My MVP for the series is Dasher, who managed to keep carrying each skirmish one after the other. This was round 4 of the PCS in the lower bracket. Frank Esports versus Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming. While improvements were noted, it felt more like the same thing from the last time these two teams had met. The Hawks as a team have shown some great skirmishing coordination, neutral setups, and this time, solid understanding of their win conditions. But the same problem plagues them. Some bizarre macro coordination, inability to play from behind, and just lackluster proactivity if it even ever shows up. As far as the PCS is concerned, they will punish weaker, unorganized teams going into Worlds, as their ability to find pigs is solid, but I don't find them to have any high hopes to getting far. For the Talons, for their part, continue to show what we'd expect from them. Some proactive, solid, well-coordinated League of Legends. The issues of bizarre macro errors and over-aggression are still present, but much of their strengths are refined in this series, from the vision to the neutral approaches to the skirmishing and team fighting. All of it is just solid. This is a great representative for the PCS's last run at Worlds, at least in the way that they look, and it's a matter of just how much can they stress test other teams. My MVP for the series is Aja, whose influence really destabilized the Hawks. This was the grand finals of the PCS, as well as a rematch. Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming versus Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports. And congrats to the two representatives for the PCS, Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming and Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports. PSG Talons have been fairly well known at this point from the Southeast Asian region ever since the PCS has been founded, essentially, after the LMS breakdown and reorganization. And quite frankly, this is awesome. This has been a good, respected representative for a long time, and it's just a matter to see which kind of version we're going to get at Worlds. We usually get a fairly well-performing one in international stages. And so far, most of their playoff run gives me the sense that this should be fairly solid. In perspective, like this is a benchmark. This is a benchmark team for lower seeded teams to really get behind, and even those in the medium tier of seeded teams, they will give them a run for their money. Now, the Hawks, for their plan, this is I think the first time that they've gone to the international stage. They've been giving the regulars of Dead at Fem a run for their money recently, especially with the addition of Evie here. So this would be mostly recognizable for people in the Southeast Asian region, as well as the Japanese League, the LJL, where this is the last time that the LJL will have a representative at Worlds proper. Because even though the LJL has been relegated to a non-international representing region, they still sent him to the PCS for their playoffs and had a chance to do so. But this is going to be the last time the LJL has a representative. And given the consistency that the Hawks have been playing within the best of five, this is a pretty good start. I have my hesitations with both of these teams. There are, granted, some choices, micro errors, macro choices, and generally either early game or late game performance question marks all around. But given this is the last year for the PCS as it is to represent themselves before they change things up and get fused together with a bunch of regions properly, these are good representatives. And I'm excited to see how they perform through play-ins and further on. With that, I want to know your thoughts. What was your favorite playoff, best of five within this particular playoff? Which team surprised you the most? I honestly am kind of surprised that that Frank, CFO, and all of the other ones from the PCS didn't put up much more of a fight than I expected them to. But that's their loss. With that, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.